For a response from the White House, we are joined now by the President's National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien. Mr. O'Brien, thank you for joining us this morning. We just heard Congresswoman Omar saying the president is failing to lead in this crisis and glorifying violence with his tweets and statements. Your response?
Well, that's really too bad, because as soon as I was on Air Force One when we saw that horrifying, I was with the president when we saw that horrifying video of what happened to George Floyd, and the president immediately tweeted out and demanded an investigation and got on the phone with General Barr and asked him to get to the bottom of it. First thing I want to say on behalf of the president, he said this to the family, but our hearts and prayers are going out to the Floyd family. We mourn with them and we grieve with them, and what happened there was horrific, and I can't even imagine what that poor family is going through as this video is played over and over again. That should have never happened in America, and it's a tragic thing. The president said that from the start. And we're with the family, and as the president said, we're with the peaceful protesters who are out demanding answers and petitioning their government about what happened to Mr. Floyd.
The president did reach out to the family, but as you know, he's also had a series of tweets where he talks about far-left thugs. He's attacked many of the protesters, attacked the Democratic mayor, saying they are weak. And of course, that tweet earlier in the week where he echoed Miami Beach in 1967 with the phrase, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts." Does the president, should he be taking responsibility for those tweets as well?
Well, I think what the president said, and the reason he uses Twitter is to get directly to the American people, and I think what he said about those tweets is that he wants to de-escalate violence and doesn't want people looting. And I want to make a big distinction between peaceful protesters, these great Americans, and that's the difference between our country and many of the authoritarian countries out there. When something like this happens, we investigate it. Our people protest. They petition their government for redress, and we stand with the protesters. It's the violent Antifa, radical militants that are coming out under cover of night, traveling across state lines, using military-style tactics to burn down our cities. And they're especially targeting the most vulnerable parts of our cities, George, the minority sections, the African-American sections and Hispanic areas, and burning down businesses of people that are trying to get a leg up. And the president's outraged by that, and we all are. And that has to stop, and we're calling on the FBI to investigate Antifa and get to the bottom of these violent rioters. And I don't want them confused with peaceful protesters that have every right to go out to the streets. That's what makes America different from many other countries around the world.
And there are peaceful protesters, as you said, but the Department of Homeland Security, which reports to you, has put out intelligence notes over the weekend warning that domestic terrorists from the far right and the far left both are looking to exploit this. It's not just Antifa and the left. They're saying they're worried about the far right as well.
Well, listen, everything I've seen and that we're being reported, where the reports we're receiving is that this is Antifa. They're crossing state lines, and we've seen this happen before. We saw it in Portland. We saw it in Seattle. We saw it in Berkeley. So, look, we'll keep our eyes open for anyone else that wants to take advantage of the situation, whether it's domestic or foreign. But right now, I think the president and Attorney General Barr want to know what the FBI has been doing to surveil, to disrupt, to take down Antifa, to prosecute them. This isn't the first time they're out there, and they're using military-style tactics and traveling around the country to take advantage of these situations and burn down our cities, and that can't be tolerated. So the FBI has got to come up with a plan to deal with Antifa. This is not the first time that they've engaged in this activity. It needs to stop. I mean, they're throwing bricks at park police and uniformed Secret Service officers. I know you know a lot of those guys, George, from when you worked here. These are good men and women who are trying to protect the White House, and they're great policemen and women around the country that are being attacked. There was an officer, a Federal Protective Service officer, who was shot in Oakland, and our hearts and our prayers go out to him and his family, Patrick Underwood. This Antifa violent activity has to stop, and we need to get to the bottom of it. We're calling on law enforcement to do it.
No question it should be condemned. I completely agree with that. But you said you haven't heard about any other incitement from the right. But the DHS warning that went out this week noted specifically that the white supremacist extremist Telegram channel was inciting the violence as well. They're saying it is both sides that are inciting violence from the outside.
Yeah, I think the actual perpetrators of the violence, the ones that are on the street, that are burning down minority-owned businesses and restaurants who've already suffered through this terrible COVID situation and are at risk of losing their business, and now they're seeing them burn to the ground. Those are Antifa radical militants, and we've seen them before in other protests, and we need to get to the bottom of it. But look, I condemn all extremists on the right or on the left, but the ones who are out on the street throwing the Molotov cocktails and attacking our police, who are acting with, for the most part, with restraint and heroically, that has to stop. And look, we condemn the police brutality of that officer who killed George Floyd. I mean, why that guy was still in the police force. I'm told he had a long record of bad conduct, and there are a few bad apples out there that are whether they're racist or they're ill-trained or they're just vicious. They've got to be rooted out of law enforcement, because 99.9% of our law enforcement officers are heroes, and they're doing great work protecting the American people. Many of them come from minority communities, and we stand with them. The president stands with them, and we're going to support them through this violent time that they're facing.
One of the things that was so shocking about that video, and Congresswoman Omar just mentioned, is that the other officers stood by. Even as George Floyd was saying, "I can't breathe," and the other officers stood by and did nothing. She believes they should be charged as well. Do you agree?
Oh, it's an absolute outrage, and I want to know where the investigation is going with those officers. What were they thinking? I mean, just as human beings, putting aside being first responders and police officers. So I think they're under investigation, both by the local authorities and the federal authorities. And I can't imagine that they won't be charged. I don't want to prejudge anything, but what we saw was horrific, and to have stood by and allowed that to happen is that just shows a lack of humanity.
What evidence do we have that foreign adversaries are also trying to exploit the situation? I want to put up a tweet that Senator Marco Rubio put out last night. He's the acting chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and he said, "Tonight we're seeing very heavy social media activity on protests and counter reactions from social media accounts linked to at least 3 foreign adversaries. They didn't create these divisions, but they are actively stoking and promoting violence and confrontation from multiple angles." Who are these foreign adversaries?
Well, Senator Rubio is spot on, and I've seen a number of tweets from the Chinese today that are taking some sort of pleasure and solace in what they're seeing here. And I want to tell our foreign adversaries, whether it's a Zimbabwe or a China, that the difference between us and you is that officer who killed George Floyd, he'll be investigated, he'll be prosecuted, he'll receive a fair trial. The American people that want to go out and protest peacefully, they're going to be allowed to seek redress from their government. They're not going to be thrown in jail for peaceful protesting. There's a difference between us and you. And when this happens, we'll get to the bottom of it and we'll clean it up. It's not going to be covered up. And this wasn't done on behalf of the party or on behalf of the state. This was a bad apple who gave sullied the reputation of our heroic law enforcement officers, and we're going to get to the bottom of it. That's the difference between us and you. The American people are going to come together after this. We're going to get to the bottom of the militant radicals that are attacking our police and our neighborhoods on the street. But there's a big difference between us and our foreign adversaries. But Marco Rubio is 100% correct that our foreign adversaries are going to take advantage of this crisis to sow discord and to try and damage our democracy. We're not going to let that happen.
You mentioned China. We also know that Russia has been actively trying in the past to spark racial unrest. Are they one of the adversaries who are now exploiting the situation as well?
Yeah, there may be Russian activists who are doing that, but the difference that I've seen so far is that, for example, we saw a Chinese foreign ministry spokesman trolling the State Department about this. So it's open. It's coming straight from the government. So it's something we're keeping an eye on. But listen, to our adversaries, the American people, we may have our political differences. And we've gone through these crises before, but we'll overcome it. And take a look at what we did yesterday in Florida, sending 2 heroic astronauts into space for the first time in 10 years from American soil on an American rocket. Look, America overcomes, and even in the midst of these crises, we're going to do great things as a country, and our adversaries aren't going to be able to take advantage of this crisis to harm us.
What are we doing right now to counter those adversaries as they try to foment more unrest here in the United States? China, Russia, you mentioned Zimbabwe.
Yeah, look, Iran has certainly been active in this, in this realm as well, and we've got a number of tools in our toolkit, George. But we're working very closely with our allies. I've been on the phone with my colleagues, national security advisors, over the weekend. We'll be meeting with them in the coming days. The democracies will stick together. We've got a series of measures that we're going to deal with China and the way that they've choked out freedom in Hong Kong. The president made a very important announcement on that front on Friday. And the U.S. government is looking at all of our relations with Hong Kong and China. So there will be a response, and it'll be proportional. But this is not something that our adversaries are going to get away with for free.
Final question. Should we expect to see an Oval Office address from the president addressing this crisis?
You know, the president, I thought, gave extraordinarily eloquent remarks yesterday as a preface to his speech about the space program in Florida. I believe ABC carried it, and you saw that, George. And I thought those were really wonderful remarks that talked about bringing the American people together and how we stand with the family of George Floyd. We stand with the family of Patrick Underwood, the officer who was killed in Oakland, and how we have to come together as a country. We stand with the peaceful protesters. And so the president's been eloquent on that front. He's accessible. He'll be speaking to the press regularly. I don't know if he'll speak from the Oval or if he'll speak to the press from the podium or as he does daily to the American people through Twitter. But you can expect the president will remain involved and will remain communicating. He'll continue to communicate with the American people throughout this crisis.
Robert O'Brien, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you, George. Thanks for having me.